I'm always interested in seeing all the costuming panels and stuff at every convention, especially because people usually bring costumes to it, and it's always great to see them. And learn. There's always something new to learn anytime you're making costumes. There's always something like the foam armoring has really taken off in the last couple of years. That wasn't really big.
Foam did not exist, it seems like.
Yeah, like 4 years ago it was all Pepakura, like in 4 or 5 it was all Pepakura, Bondo,
Right.
And now everyone's doing EVA foam.
I'm going to go through this kind of quick, and I know we haven't really touched necessarily on the actual construction of pieces. That's going to be kind of up to people's skill levels. There's millions of different ways to make things, and we hope that the information we provided you guys with, tools and materials, kind of gives you a direction to go in with how you actually come up with a part. But let's say you've come to the point and you have your dagger here and it's ready to be painted, and how to take it from this and make it look more realistic. Go to the next slide. There's kind of a, next slide please. Sorry, that's running slow. There's kind of a base that all of these things sort of follow. This goes, top and down. The first step, upper left, is going to be to prime something, because paint doesn't like to stick to things, and primer loves to stick to stuff, and paint only really likes to stick to primer. So whenever you have something made, you're going to prime it first, and that's going to enable whatever top coat you have in order to stick to it. Next step is going to be base coats. That's the second image in the upper section. I can't tell left or right, so that's right.
A lot of this stuff can be done just with spray paint, rail cans off the shelf.
Almost everything I do is with spray paint or hand painted acrylics. When it comes to painting things, lighter colors go on first, then darker colors, metallics go on last. That's pretty much a standard set rule. When you try and tape off metallics, sometimes they'll leave a residue peel off. If you try and cover a black helmet with a white stripe, if it's a very thin thing, you're going to get away with it, but if you're doing a half and half, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass. You're going to have to do 30 coats of paint. After that, if you have any decals, you're going to want to put those on next. I'll touch on decals in a little bit. And then the last thing is going to be weathering. So I'll go ahead, I'll explain a little bit more about those in the next step. So next slide, please. I've got a couple things. This is an example of weathered versus unweathered. The part on the right is fresh out of the mold, just plastic, and I have metal filings in the actual helmet that make it look more like aluminum. The one on the left of the picture has been weathered. It took me about a day, and that it shows the kind of age and wear and tear that you want in a part.
So you didn't really cast that out of aluminum?
I didn't know. If anybody saw my Facebook page, I did a April Fool's joke where I told people to melt aluminum cans in a frying pan in order to make parts out of metal. And I got a lot of people who were very angry at me for that. They're like, I was going to try this, and that seemed like such
I really want to know if anyone did put a can
very
in the
disturbing.
pan.
Well, I got a lot of notes that people were like, people are going to hurt themselves. You know that? I hope you're okay with that. Okay, just as a point of fact here, aluminum melts at 6,000 degrees. And if you can get your home oven to do that, you have a jet engine. Right. So they're just going to have hot aluminum cans. Weathering, anyway. A bunch of different techniques, a bunch of different processes. One of the biggest things that I can say is whatever you put on as your weathering coat should not be the same kind of paint that you use as your base coat. So let's say you paint something and it's all enamel. If you start painting enamel on top of that, that is going to release the paint underneath it, and then it's going to mix the colors together. I typically do base coats in spray paint, enamel, and lacquer. I do my top coats weathering in acrylic, because one's water-based, one's oil-based, they're never going to interact, and it's not going to screw up your base paint job. That's what this is. All of the silver, all of the, the light rusting bits and stuff, they're all done in acrylic. All the base coats are done in enamels and lacquer. So next slide, please. The other thing I want to stress is that less is going to be more on things. You might want to just, slather a bunch of silver paint to show how scratched up something is, but really, when you look at a real firearm, or you look at a real piece of body armor that is used in the real world, the damage is going to be a little bit more minimal, because these things aren't getting the living snot beaten out of them. They're typically built to take a little bit more damage than than you might think. So, a little bit of dirt, a little bit of silver lines is going to go a lot further than just covering everything. Next slide, please. Okay, I think I touched on paints just a little while ago. Acrylic, enamel, lacquer, acrylic enamel, which is actually a combination. It's all very confusing. Certain paints, when you put them on top of other paints, will lift them up and cause bubbling and tearing, and it looks really terrible. The easiest thing to do is test everything first. When you're painting your piece, take a scrap piece of wood, a scrap piece of plastic, paint it with something else, see if it reacts before you have a very nice helmet or dagger or gauntlet or gun, and then you go to do one line of spray paint and everything turns into this horrified burn victim mess, and then you just start to cry. And when that...
Sometimes your first couple projects will be your test.
Yeah, that was mine. Actually, my portal gun, I repainted, I think, 5 times. And the really stupid part is I painted, and then all the paint would lift off, and I went, ah, damn, I'd sand it all down, and then I painted again the exact same way. I'm like, what's going wrong? Obviously, it can't be me. Fillers, I said before that I will sometimes use aluminum powder. Aluminum powder, I should note, is flammable and very toxic to breathe, so be careful with that. But a lot of times people will use aluminum fillers in stuff where they have a mold, like this helmet here. You dust the mold, you fill it with plastic. That's a little bit more of an advanced technique. I have a friend of mine who will paint parts in gloss black paint, sprinkle aluminum powder onto it, wait for it to dry, and you can actually polish it up as though it were actual metal. And that's a really neat technique if you want something that looks metallic, but metallic spray paints don't always have that same effect. Also on the helmet on the right, the sort of rusting areas are rust. I went out and I have iron filing powder, kind of dust that on just with some water, and then you take a vinegar, a lemon juice, hydrogen peroxide, you just spray it. About 3 hours later, you've got gorgeous rusting effects.
Try this at home.
Try it outside. Also, if you mix hydrogen peroxide, vinegar, salt, and lemon juice together, you will have the most disgusting smelling bottle in the world, and it will be impossible to get it off your hands.
So if you have a sister.
Yeah. One thing I skipped over on the safety thing that's really, really important, especially if you're working with anything like that, is ventilation. Just having the respirator is mandatory, but also working in a space where you can move air out, like a garage with the door open, outside, or if you have to, someplace with a box fan pointing out the window when you're near it, and getting some sort of cross ventilation so that any sort of fumes, maybe you're breathing them in, but at least they're not staying there. At least
you're not breathing as many.
You're not breathing in all of it.
Okay. I'm going to have to go a little quick because I'm running out of time on my segment here. A paint rack is something that's going to be ideal. The worst thing to do is have to paint one side of things and then wait the next day to flip it over and then do the other side, because you're not going to get an even coat, and if you're anything like me, you're going to be very impatient and go, yeah, it's dry now, flip it over, and completely ruin the first thing. Yeah. I make paint racks out of PVC pipe, just coat hangers. I bought little clips at Home Depot. This cost about 20 bucks in material, and it's great to set it out in your backyard, spray something, leave it to dry, and you don't have to worry about messing with it. Texturing, there's a bunch of different spray paints out there that have hammered metal texture, which is the one on the left. The grip, the one on the right, is actually a patio furniture texture. It makes for really good like gun grips and such. Go to a hardware store, find some textured paint, test it on a few things, and it's remarkable what kind of neat effects you can get at. Dry brushing I touched on earlier a little bit. That's really just the process of taking a brush, a very rough bristle brush, getting a very small amount of silver paint, just accenting edges. It simulates some very fine wear and tear on things without being really overt, putting gashes on it. Next. Antiquing, not like going out and buying old armoires, is a technique where you paint a part sort of a glossy color. You go over the whole thing with a darker color, and then you kind of take wet sandpaper or steel wool, and you bring out the highlighted areas. So all the lettering on that whole center section was painted gold, then airbrushed brown, and then sanded back to bring the gold back out. That gives a really nice sort of old feel to something that's had a lot of, almost like a piece of bronze that's been rubbed. Decals will set anything apart, and if you see a rifle or any sort of prop that has a decal on it versus something that's tried to be hand painted, you can immediately tell the difference. And it's kind of difficult to get them perfect, but it's really worth it in the end. The upper left one is a printed decal. That's just something I did on my inkjet printer at home using like Avery labels. I trimmed it out, basically pasted it on there and then painted and weathered over it so you don't see the seams. Vinyl masking is basically just getting parts cut at like a vinyl shop. You put the piece on, you paint it, you peel it off, and you have a really nice sort of painted decal on there. Bill's got a good...
These were done even with, and it's not fantastic, but they can't tell, they're 10 feet away. This was done with masking tape. I just cut something out of masking tape and stuck it on there.
Vinyl decals are pretty self-explanatory. Anybody who's got one of those in their car will be familiar with those. You can design them. There's a bunch of places online that'll print them out for you. Sometimes local sign shops will do it too. And the last one that I really love are water slide decals. They're a little bit finicky because you can only put darker decals on lighter surfaces, but you can print them out of your home printer at home, which is really nice. You can get a water slide decal printer or paper from places that make custom coffee mugs and such. I think I might have to blow through the rest of these things kind of quickly because I think I'm running out of time. But my preferred technique for weathering anything is what I call the paper towel technique. You cover the entire thing with a really loose coat of acrylic paint, and then you wipe it all off with a wet paper towel. What that'll do is it'll build up paint on the paper towel, so you're not actually cleaning everything off. It will dull it and kind of make everything a little bit dingy and a little bit dirty, but it'll also leave all of the paint in the darker areas and the seams. So that kind of makes all the raised areas pop out a bit more and gives it a little bit more visual depth. But my friend Sean does an interesting technique where he uses mustard when he paints something. So he'll do a coat of silver, literally paint like mustard on it, then do a coat of blue, then more mustard, then a coat of orange.
You mean like mustard from the grocery store?
Like from the grocery store. You can, now there are more professional ways to do this. You can use latex if you want. Sometimes you can use acrylic paint.
Would ketchup work?
Ketchup would work. Mayonnaise would work if you want to leave that out in the hot sun.
I don't have any mustard in my house. So I'm thinking ahead.
Yeah, relish might work as well. Anyway, basically what happens is the paint will dry and it'll kind of make a little blister over whatever substrate you put on there. Take a toothpick, you peel the paint back off, you get these really neat sort of gash effects in there. It's good for really, really heavy weathering. Stuff like Spartan armor does really well with this sort of stuff. I have another friend of mine, Ryan Paulser, who likes to kind of weather his props beforehand. This is a digger launcher he just finished from Gears of War, and he dragged that around on his driveway for about an hour and a half. Now, in addition to that, he also used a Dremel tool, and he used some rocks that he just hammered up against it. But I'd like to note something, that if you look at the part on the left, he made it clean and perfect first, and then he weathered it. And that's something that a lot of people kind of try and skip. They're like, well, I've got some dings and nicks in here, I'll just paint it and it'll look like weathering, like damage later on. But that never quite looks right. Damage is best done when it's intentional. So the best thing I would say when you're building a piece is make it perfect, then make it screwed up.
That's why I meant to burn my finger with a soldering iron, because it's intentional. It looks very good and real.
Right, yeah. Last thing is clear coats, and this is will be heartbreaking if you pick the wrong one at the end of your project and you do one pass and then all of your hard work and your weather and your base coat is just destroyed. So you see a bunch of different clears on here: acrylic, enamel, lacquer, acrylic enamel again. They're matte, gloss, etc. Test everything. And I know it's going to be the night before the con, and you guys are going to be like, I gotta. But just take one piece, it'll take you 2 minutes and try it, because otherwise, if you don't, you're going to be crying.